Nitesh, you have taken away my co-host, so I can't share my screen. Rahim, Nitesh, kindly make me the co-host quickly, please.
Isha, I think he's making you post.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the second day of Delivering for Nutrition in South Asia on Transforming Diets. Yesterday, we had 4 amazing and packed sessions where we started with the opening plenary, where we had Dr. Anna Herford presenting on what is South Asia eating. After that, we had our first thematic session on maternal diets and determinants and interventions in South Asia, which was chaired by Dr. Avula Lakshmaya from National Institute of Nutrition, India, and Dr. Kausar Afsana from BRAC University, Bangladesh. And we had 7 presentations in that packed session. In the afternoon, we had a session on adolescent diets and determinants in South Asia, which was chaired by Dr. Shweta Khandelwal from Public Health Foundation of India and Dr. Gopinath Radhakrishnan from MS Swaminathan Research Foundation, where we saw 5 presentations on the dietary practices of adolescents in South Asia. We ended the first day with a keynote session where we had Dr. Simon Barquera from the National Institute of Public Health, Mexico, and who's also the president-elect for World Obesity Federation, delivering his keynote lecture on countering commercial influences on diets, the experience of Mexico, followed by a panel discussion by Stuart Gillespie from IFPRI and the University of Sussex, Dr. Nazma Shaheen from University of Dhaka, and Dr. Avula Lakshmaya from National Institute of Nutrition. So that was yesterday, and hope that some of you were part of these amazing sessions. Today, again, we have a lineup of 4 sessions where we have 3 thematic sessions. We start today in the morning with diets, determinants, and interventions, followed by we have a sessions on children's diet in South Asia. And then later in the afternoon, we have a session on policies and programs. We'll end today with a closing plenary where we will have representatives from our co-host across the South Asian countries, and we'll be talking about the implications of what we have discussed in the 2 days and how do we want to take it forward and what are the policy recommendations going forward from this conference. So welcome all of you again to the second day of Delivering for Nutrition conference. Before introducing the co-chairs for this session, I would just quickly like to play a co-host video where we have asked our co-hosts to, in a minute, in 30 seconds to 50 seconds, tell us that why implementation research is important when we talk about sustainability of diets in the context of South Asia.
Hello, everyone. I am Marie Ruel, and I'm Director of the Poverty, Health, and Nutrition Division at IFPRI. And I also lead a new 1CGIR initiative called Sustainable Healthy Diets Through Food Systems Transformation. The topic of supporting equitable access to sustainable healthy diets for this year's conference could not be more relevant and timely given the ongoing global food prices and economic crises that are affecting everyone in the world. We know, however, that these crises disproportionately affect the poor and women in particular, and exacerbate inequalities in access and affordability of nutritious foods and of sustainable healthy diets. So we really need to use all the tools that implementation research offers to better understand what are the constraints that consumers face, and how can we develop and implement innovations that will help shift dietary patterns toward healthy, affordable, and sustainable diets in South Asia. I wish you a very stimulating and successful conference. Thank you.
That was Marie-Ruelle from IFPRI. And now I would like to take the opportunity to introduce the co-chairs of this session, who are Meredith Jackson and Ananya Avasthi. Meredith is a global technical advisor for Helen Keller, currently living in Malawi. With over 20 years of practical and academic experience in civil society, government, private sector, and academia in Latin America, Asia Pacific, Africa, and the United States, she works primarily with food and nutrition security and resilience programs focusing on MNCHA, GYSI, and social norms at the nexus of food and health systems. As a biocultural medical anthropologist, Meredith's approach to understanding human health and behavior is grounded in understanding the cultural, social, political, and economic influence on health, decision-making, and psychosocial and other well-being outcomes. Welcome, Meredith, and request you to kindly turn on your camera so everybody can see you. Our second co-chair for this session is Ananya Avasthi, who's experienced in impact assessment, management consulting, and policy analysis for public-led initiatives in low and middle-income countries. For the past 5 years, Dr. Avasthi has served as an assistant director to the Indian Research Center for Harvard School of Public Health, where she oversaw the implementation of global research projects, training programs, and knowledge translation activities with a range of stakeholders in India, including ministries, NGOs, and private hospitals. Currently, Dr. Avasthi is a founder and director for Anuvad Solutions, which works as an accelerator for knowledge translation to promote evidence-based policy making for India's health and nutrition agenda. She holds a master's degree in public health from Harvard University. Welcome, Meredith. Welcome, Ananya. And I hand over the session to both of you.
Thank you so much, Isha, and a big thanks to the International Food Policy Research Institute and the co-hosts for organizing such an important and timely thematic session on diets, determinants, and interventions in South Asia. To commence with a little context, as we all understand, diet is a critical determinant for health and nutritional outcomes, with clear implications for development of sustainable food systems. South Asia, in particular, as we understand, is undergoing a nutrition transition, wherein the populations are facing the double burden of undernutrition and micronutrient deficiencies on one end of the spectrum, and are also battling with adverse diet-related health outcomes like diabetes, obesity, and other cardiometabolic disorders. And a large reason for the current situation that we find ourselves in is the massive change in our modern food consumption patterns, owing to increased monocropping, urbanization, sedentary lifestyles, coupled with market-driven advertising and supply of ultra-processed comfort foods. This problem gets compounded in the South Asian context, where public health infrastructure, affordability of healthy diets, or affordability of health services overlaid with inequities. These are all big variables in influencing our final health outcomes. With that context, today's panel aims to understand the larger picture on South Asian diets, data and relevant country-level surveys in this regard, and what that means for evidence-informed nutrition interventions in South Asia. With that context, may I please request Meredith, my co-chair, to take it from here. Thanks.
Thanks, Ananya. And I apologize if there's noise in the background. I'm in a hotel lobby. I've tried to find a quiet place. Ananya put it well, very well, what the purpose of this entire conference is to really highlight how understanding dietary determinants can really help us do better programming. If we don't understand the full context, if we don't view diets and decision-making on how people choose their diets within the larger system, within the socio-cultural system, the political economic system, then we will miss out on really improving people's nutrition intake. People don't make decisions in a vacuum. They make a decision within that system, and the determinants are critical and crucial to understanding. And in South Asia, the recently released State of Food and Insecurity and the recent SOFI from 2022 highlights that South Asia has some of the poorest nutrition outcomes. It's got some of the highest rates of malnutrition in the world now. And so it's critical for us to understand what is driving decision making when people are deciding what food to eat. We know that knowledge does not equal action. It doesn't change behavior, just changing knowledge. We've learned that over many years of development work. And now it's time to really understand what is it that needs to change to enable people to make those optimal decisions and have the optimal diet. So with that, I'd like to introduce the first set of speakers today. Our first speaker is Mohammed Masoom Ali from the International Food Policy and Research Institute in Bangladesh. He will be presenting on trends and inequities in food, energy, protein, fat, and carbohydrate intakes in rural Bangladesh. Mr. Ali is a research analyst in the Poverty, Health, and Nutrition Division at IFPRI. He joined in August of 2021 under the Bangladesh Agriculture Policy Activity Project. His research focuses on dietary intake and nutritional assessment of mothers and children and nutrition and food security situations in Bangladesh. He has published several articles in the peer-reviewed journals emphasizing dietary patterns and determinants of Bangladesh between 1985 to 2010 and factors related to maternal and child malnutrition. Prior to joining IFPRI, Mr. Ali worked for 5 years as a program and research analyst with Helen Keller International, Bangladesh. He also worked for Charité, Germany as a consultant. He completed his graduation in nutrition and food science from the University of Dhaka and received post-graduation in food security policy and management from the University College Cork in Ireland. Our next speaker is Renuka Jayatasiya, who will be speaking on nutrition status and gaps in the diets of Sri Lankans. She is a medical research from the Medical Research Institute in Colombo, Sri Lanka. Dr. Jatisa has an MBBS and many other degrees and is a consultant community physician, head of the Department of Nutrition Medical Research Institute in Sri Lanka. She obtained her nutrition training in the UK and has worked as a nutrition specialist for the Ministry of Health and UNICEF. She's the current president of the Sri Lanka Medical Nutrition Association and regional coordinator of the Iodine Global Network and past president of the Nutrition Society. She pioneered establishing the MD clinical nutrition degree in Sri Lanka. Her research interests are child and adult malnutrition, micronutrients, food security, and clinical nutrition. She has published widely, and is an editor and reviewer for numerous journalists. Our third speaker today is Maxime Parveen. She will be speaking on spatial differences in diet quality and economic vulnerability to food insecurity in Bangladesh, highlighting results from the 2016 Household Income and Expenditure Survey. She's with the Institute of Nutrition and Food Science at Dhaka University. Ms. Parveen is a medical officer at the Dhaka Civil Surgeon Office in Dhaka. She is also studying a Master of Philosophy at the Institute of Nutrition and Food Science at the University of Dhaka. Her research interest is in the field of nutrition and food science, and she completed her undergraduate in medical science with an MBBS from the Sikder Medical College under the University of Dhaka. Now back to you, Ananya.
Thanks, Meredith. And of course, introducing the next set of speakers for today's session, we have with us Abira Nuwar. Abira is a faculty of the Institute of Nutrition and Food Science at the University of Dhaka. She completed her master's and bachelor's in nutrition and food science. Her research interests include the management of non-communicable diseases through implementing community-based and individual-level interventions. She is skilled in qualitative and quantitative research methodologies, development and validation of tools, and softwares such as Stata and RedCap. Next, we are joined by Esther Shu. Esther is a PhD candidate in the Global Health Implementation Science Program at the University of Washington. Esther is interested in assessing and operationalizing interventions to address the double burden of malnutrition globally. Her research focuses on economic evaluations of food system strategies in resource-constrained settings, understanding food environments, and drivers of unhealthy consumption. She has over 14 years of international development experience, specialized in agriculture and nutrition. She has lived and worked in Uganda and DRC, where she managed food security, nutrition, and financial inclusion programs. She also holds an MPH in Global Health, Public Health, Nutrition from the Emory University. And then we are joined by Anjali Pant. Anjali Pant is a senior research analyst at the International Food Policy Research Institute, New Delhi. Anjali contributes to evidence-based research activities using large-scale public health and socioeconomic data sets. Her research interests include investigating context-specific drivers of undernutrition, its impact on human development, and identifying policy measures that can help improve maternal and child health. Anjali has a master's degree in economics from the Madras School of Economics in Chennai, India, and has worked in the development sector for over 6 years. And finally, we are joined by Ashi Gupta. Ashi is an experienced research assistant who's skilled in data analysis, and statistics. Ashi holds a master's degree focused on economics from Boston University and is currently pursuing a PhD in economics from the Delhi School of Economics. So a very warm welcome to all our panelists and speakers today, and to everybody who's joined the session. Let's get started now with the first presentation. And for that, could I please invite Mohammed Masoom Ali to take it from here? Thank you.
Thank you, Ananya. Just before Masoom starts, a reminder that all the presenters have 8 minutes, and you'll be given a time check at 6 minutes and then a time up warning at 8 minutes. So kindly request you to stick to the time. Thank you, and please go ahead, Masoom. Masoom, you're on mute. We can't hear you.
Sorry, now it's unmuted. Thank you, Ananda, Isha, and Meredith. And Meredith, good to see you after a long time. I worked with Meredith for 2 or 3 years in Bangladesh. So good morning.
See you too.
So good morning from Bangladesh. So Meredith already briefly described my background and everything, what I'm doing right now and what I did with dietary data in Bangladesh. So now I'm going to present one of my recent work that already published in Journal of Nutrition. So I looked at trend and inequities in food, energy, protein, and fat, carbohydrate intakes in rural Bangladesh. So next slide, please. So first of all, I'm going to say what we did this research. So those who are working in dietary field and who managing and dealing with dietary data, those people know about the dietary issue. The dietary data collection is really difficult, and we are having a lot of problem to getting the dietary data, exactly the individual food intake. So there is a limited evidence on food consumption pattern and how the disparities in food and nutrient intake have changed in Bangladesh. So we also know that the BDA, I mean the Bangladesh Demographic Health Survey, does not collect individual food intake data. Even they did not include the dietary diversity information in Demographic Health Survey. Also the household income expenditure data, they collect only for at the household level. They focus on, they just collect information in the last 14 days. So they just ask the respondent what you have purchased in last 14 days and sort of for your consumption at the household level. They didn't collect the information at the what an individual consuming at a certain period of time. And also household level food consumption that are relatively accurate at estimating individual level intake, but it's really hard to calculate who was under 2 years old and school going children, and also how HIS did not include the information on pregnant and lactating information. Also, it's really hard to estimate the nutritional demands by age and physical status using the household level food consumption data. So that's why we we are using the Bangladesh Integrated Household Survey. IFPRI conducted this survey. It's an extensive survey, including the agricultural plot level, individual dietary level, and as well as the food security, and everything they try to collect in Bangladesh Integrated Household Survey. So I will go in detail in my next slide about the BISS survey. So in terms of objective, we examined the trends and inequities in energy, protein, fat, carbohydrate between 2011 and 2018 for all household members, and also looked at the inequities in nutrient intake by age group, gender, and expenditure quintile over the 7 years period. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to talk about the method and analysis. So in our methodology, first of all, I'm talking about the data source. Data source is, since I informed you that we are using the BISS information. So BISS has 3 rounds, 2011, 2015, 2018. But for our research work, we used 2011 and 2018 data sets. So dietary data was collected by 24-hour recall method and food-weighing method at the household level as well as the individual level. There's in sample size. So since BISS is a panel survey, so BISS followed more than 5,000 households, including the individual to more than 20,000. But most of the household is splitted, and also a few individual member moved away from the household. So we got the less number of individual, but we got higher number of household, because the large number of household is split into single number of household. So in terms of inclusion, we did not include the less than 2 years of children. The getting dietary information from under 2 years children is really hard. They are also breastfed. So calculating their nutrient intake, it's really difficult. So in terms of exclusion, we did not include the who are fasting, who are sick, who are unwilling and away from home. Also, we followed the Goldberg theory methods. If anyone had less than 500 kilocalorie intake and more than 5,000 kilocalorie intake, we excluded from our analysis. We used Bangladesh food composition table, updated food composition table that developed by University of Dhaka, INFS, and also the Nazma Shahin madam. So we use this updated food composition table for our research analysis. So then I'm going to talk about the estimated energy requirement calculation procedure. We followed WHO, FAO, and WHO guideline. It has a different equation based on age and sex. So I'm not going to go in detail. If anyone want to know, please let me know. Then I will share my other works. So share this equation. So estimated energy requirement is a product of the individual basal metabolic rate and as well and physical activity level. So for insufficient energy intake, so we sorry, it's 5 minutes. It's really, no, I'm going so fast. So the 4% of energy from protein, carbohydrate, fat intake, we followed the IOM method, and then we analyzed the equity load and absolute and relative inequality. We followed the concentration index and slope of inequality index. So next slide, please. So in terms of result, we got the dietary diversity information is dietary diversity significantly improved, but the total quantity of food consumed decreased by 6%. So that desirable dietary intake for Bangladeshi people is around 1,240, but we are consuming less, around consuming less than our desirable dietary intake. Also, since our rice consumption decreased, so energy consumption, protein, carbohydrate, everything has been decreased, but we have intake excessive carbohydrate. Next slide, please. Next slide. So insufficiency. So just I'm going to talk about the first one of my figure. If we look at the figure, the contribution of energy from fat, carbohydrate, we are consuming more carbohydrate. It's all about more than 75%. So our diet is not balanced. According to IOM, we have to consume 45 to 65% carbohydrate, and then 10 to 25% protein, and 20 to 30% fat. But we are consuming more carbohydrate. But we are consuming more carbohydrate. We are having. Should I stop? Isha?
Kindly wrap it up quickly.
Okay, thank you. So the insufficient energy intake is high for children, whereas it's low among the other age group. It's around 20%, but for fat and protein, we are consuming less amount of fat and protein according to our requirement, but we are consuming excessive carbohydrate. Next slide, please. In our inequity plot, we got that quintile 1 is poorer group and quintile 5 is richer group. So we found that insufficient energy, protein, and fat intake was higher among poorer group, and also whereas poorer people are having excessive carbohydrate compared to the richer people. In inequity plot, the inequity decreased in energy intake, but for protein, it did not decrease and increase. It's in a stable level, but the length for protein insufficiency between poorer and richer is relatively high compared to carbohydrate and fat. Next slide, please. So since I have to rush, so then policy limits. As I told earlier, that we are consuming higher amount of carbohydrate. Our diet is not balanced. So in terms of policy implication, so we found that agriculture diversity is associated with dietary diversity. So rice is overwhelmingly dominant in Bangladeshi crop pattern and diets. So the production of non-rice crops and non-crop agricultural commodity must be increased to improve the dietary diversity. Also, prices is a big issue during COVID, after COVID, and now where price is higher for most of the commodities. So for balancing the price for producer and consumer, so there should be a link up between the producer and consumer to mitigate this issue. And also the combination of nutrition education, production diversity, and everything should be combined to improve the balanced diet, and as well as the developed efficient and effective food system for enhanced production of nutrient-rich food. Also, IFPRI conducted several surveys for women empowerment in agricultural index. We found that women are the key. Women are playing important role within the food system to improve the dietary diversity as well as household food security. Thank you so much. That's it from me. Yes,
Thank you.
And we have the next presenter, Dr. Renuka.
Good morning from Sri Lanka. First of all, I would like to thank chairpersons as well as Purnima for giving us this opportunity. Our research is on the nutritional status and the gaps in the diet of Sri Lankans. Next slide, please. Actually, when we did this study, our objectives was to assess the gaps in the diet, and because when we take the rationale, why did we started this study? In Sri Lanka is facing the non-communicable diseases, and we are actually having the nutrition transition period. And then in that sense, we had an issue with identifying whether we are having the kind of undernutrition issue as well as overnutrition issue, how this diet is going on in the country. And we have not assessed it for the last 20 years. So this was done after 20 years period, how these gaps were going on in the country. So this was a cross-sectional community household-based survey. That which included about 2,000 households. This study was conducted in the multi-stage sampling strategy, and with the sample we have collected 75 clusters in this study, and our Sri Lanka, the lowest administrative division was Ramsey, which consists of the unit which having the 3,000 population. That was a cluster we have taken for this study. And then the study was divided, because in Sri Lanka we have the 3 levels of sectors, that is urban, rural, and the plantation sector. So these 3 sectors were included in the sample, and then altogether 75 clusters were selected. So in each cluster, we have taken 25 households randomly. So our data collection, which have been done in the last year, in this one, in the data analysis, we conducted the 24 dietary recall. And especially the whole household dietary intake was taken for the whole day. And then this was expressed into the consumption unit per day. The one consumption actually we have really developed has taken for the average adult man weighing 65 kilograms. So that was the one that we have taken as a sedentary work. Then it was divided into the other members in the population. And in addition to that, these coefficient worked out was calories were proportionately divided. And then the different groups and the sex and the physical activity levels were taken, and the nutrient and the food intakes were calculated as per consumption unit. Actually, this is not my presentation. I have sent you the presentation. This is you are put in my abstract. Just take the next slide, please. So this is the kind of things I have been really explaining to you. And then here we have used the food composition table of Sri Lanka to get the conversion. At the same time, we have the Sri Lankan RDA table, and which was taken to compare the adequacy of the diet. Next slide, please. So this slide shows you the nutritional status of the adults in this study. You can clearly see the difference between male and female, and as total, we have 13% of undernutrition and the 49% of overweight, and the 32% of overweight and the 12% of obesity. So in that sense, you can see about only 50% of the people are in the normal range of nutrition, and all the others are in the two sides of it. So which was the kind of problem that we are facing as Sri Lanka. Then you can see even the male, female, there was a bit of the change, but obesity is less in male than female. Next slide, please. So this is what we found in the dietary assessment. Actually, our dietary diversity was good, but when we look at the median intake of the macro and micronutrients, you can see our protein adequacy is above 100, but energy was something around 80%. But what was a remarkable feature that we have observed in this study was the micronutrient intakes. Some of the micronutrients are very poor in that sense. In Sri Lanka, we have been thinking we are getting enough vitamin Bs, but in this study, we found even the vitamin B is also inadequate. This may be due to the changing of the dietary patterns in the country. But at the same time, one of the remarkable features that we observed was the calcium intake. So the calcium intake was actually below 50%. And the other thing is, when we look at iron was also 50%. So these are the kind of major deficiencies that we are coming across at the moment in the Sri Lanka: iron deficiency, as well as the other calcium deficiency and things I have not really highlighted properly. So this was a study, actually, it was highlighted. These are the kind of micronutrients, even in the future, we have to really look for and the improvement per se. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, and at the same time, as a result, I just want to mention one thing. This is, I have presented you the median intake, but when you take the ranges, there was a very big ranges from the lower to higher. So that may be the reason that we are having this higher overweight, as well as even the undernutrition is persisting in the population. So considering all these things, in conclusion, double burden of malnutrition is an issue in Sri Lanka, as well as extent of protein adequacy is very prominent. And the micronutrient inadequacy is also very prominent, especially iron, calcium, and vitamin A. As recommendation, we have to focus the double burden of malnutrition. It's not even the double burden, now it is a triple burden of malnutrition. At the same time, we have to educate the communities to restructure the diet to improve the micronutrient content, because our diversity is good, but now the problem is the quantity that they are consuming. So we have to really focus on the serving sizes. And then this is a good study as a baseline. Then we have to continuously monitor the diet in household levels at the frequent intervals. I think that's what the Bangladesh have been doing. So that's another steps that we have to look for. With that, I think this is my presentation, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Renuka. Can I request our next speaker, Maxim Parveen, to turn on the camera while I share the presentation?
Thank you.
Over to you, Maxim.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My presentation is Special Difference in Diet Quality and Economic Vulnerability Food Insecurity in Bangladesh, result from 2016 Household Income and Expenditure Survey. Next slide. Objectives, two objectives, general objectives and specific objectives, to explore the special difference in diet quality and economic vulnerability of food insecurity with the association of socio-demographic characteristics at the household level in Bangladesh. Specific objectives, there are so many specific objectives. We evaluate diet quality using household dietary diversity score, percentage of food energy from staples. Second is to evaluate economic vulnerability of food insecurity based on the percentage of expenditure on food. To explore the relationship of socio-demographic factor on the variation of diet quality, and to apply the spatial analysis to explore the regional variation of diet quality with the urban, rural, and city corporation level in Bangladesh, along with the statistical approach. Next slide, please. Methods and materials. Data source with the study was used household income and expenditure survey, highest 2016 data. And study design, we analysis the secondary analysis of cross-sectional data, and this sampling, high sampling data, the highest 2016 data is divided into division level as twin test data as rural, urban, and city corporation. And new two cities, Mymensingh and Rangpur, and Borishal and Sylhet, as there are similar characteristics as urban. And data also divided into district level as 132 substrata, and rural, urban, and city corporation, rural 64, urban 64, and city 4. Up to sub-district level, weightage provided in the data from a sample to population, and total 46,080 households were sampled in Bangladesh. There is a total 2,304 primary sampling unit, 36 primary sampling unit in district, and 20 primary sampling unit consists of household. And food consumption data has 2016 consists of a distinct part with 145 categories of food items during the preceding of 14 days using 7 2-day diaries. A total of 125 food items of face data were considered in the diet quality analysis, excluding cigarette and other smoking items. And we use some software, RStudio, Strata, RGS, and Microsoft Excel to proceed the data. Next slide, please. HDDS, Household Dietary Diversity Score. We calculated the HDDS to assess the diet quality per household per day, and HDDS can be defined as the number of distinct food group consumed per household per day. And household dietary diversity score calculated in 12-point score, and it indicates ability household economic access of food. The HDDS is divided into 3 categories: fast, low, medium, and high. And the specially map using the average household value of sub-district level as Upazila level of Bangladesh. And second, the percentage of food energy from staples. We calculated this equation, the percentage of food energy from staples, total energy from staples divided by total energy from all foods into 100. Higher percentage of total food energy from staples indicates poor diet quality. That's why lower percentage of consumed food from staples are better. The spatial distribution of this indicator was mapped to observe the level of food consumed from staple in sub-district level of Bangladesh. Next slide, please. Third one, the economic vulnerability to food insecurity. We estimate the economic vulnerability to food insecurity per household by the percentage of expenditure on food using the highest 2016 data. This is the equation, the total expenditure on food divided by total expenditure into 100. In general, the higher percentage of total consumption expenditure on food indicate very high vulnerability of food insecurity or poor diet quality. The average percentage of expenditure on food per sub-district household or analysis, especially to illustrate the spatial distribution scenarios in Bangladesh. And fourth, association between diet quality with its determinants. Diet quality parameters, HDDS, PFES, and PEF of sample household are correlated with characteristics of 9 socioeconomic determinants using ANOVA statistical tests. Dependent variables as like household dietary diversity score, percentage of food energy from staple, and percentage of expenditure on food. And independent variables are income, age, gender, education, household head, religion, number of earners, location or region. Next slide. Result parts, the household dietary diversity score, the average national diet diversity, about 6.3 in Bangladesh during the study period. Divisionally, the range of HDDS was from 5.6 to 7.2. The highest average household diet diversity prevalent in Chittagong and lowest in the Rangpur division. The HDDS show that the rural region in terms of settlement and the northwest and southeastern region had mostly low diet diversity, and the highest average household diet diversity prevailed in Chittagong and lowest in Rajshahi division, and lowest diversity diet diversity is observed in rural area. Next slide. Percentage of food energy from staples. We see the northwest and southeastern region illustrate poor diet quality, having more dependence on staple as a source of energy, and central region show better diet quality with lesser dependence on staple. Food quality diet in terms of high percentage food energy from staples also prevailed in rural area, more than 71%. Among different kind of settlements, highest in Rangpur, about 77%, and lowest in Chittagong, 64% among all division. Next slide. And economic vulnerability to food insecurity. We see the medium level of vulnerability prevalent throughout the country, showing yellow color. Central part of the country seems to be all the lowest risks of vulnerability, showing green color, and Mymensingh division observed highest vulnerability to food insecurity, and Dhaka division had the lowest vulnerability of food security. In terms of settlement, rural area had comparatively high percentage of expenditure on food. That's why high economic vulnerability to food insecurity. Next slide, please. Relationship between socio-demographic characteristics and diet quality of household. Diet quality parameters of sample household are correlated with characteristics of 9 socio-demographic determinants. The result stipulated significant relationship between socio-demographic determinants and dietary quality parameters. Next slide. Conclusion, diet quality degraded from central to peripheral part of the country. The north-northwest region are mostly low diet quality in Bangladesh. The majority, the sub-district level where the countryside areas show higher food insecurity. Diet quality significantly in high household where the head, female, middle-aged, Muslim, higher educated, higher income, and residing in cities. With proper understanding of the underlying factor causing disparity of diet quality and economic vulnerability to food insecurity, assist the policymaker undertaking proper intervention, establishing equality and food sustainability in this sector. This study also suggested establishing women manpower, nutrition and general education and income generation activities in targeted area, as these characteristics are linked to better diet quality. Next slide. Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Maxim. May I request Abira Nawar to kindly make the next presentation? Over to you, Abira.
Thank you. Hello, everyone, and welcome to my presentation. I'm Abira Nawar from Institute of Nutrition and Food Science, University of Dhaka. And today I will be presenting on cost of recommended diet and its affordability in Bangladesh. Next slide, please. Okay, the first slide is the rationale and objectives. The cost of diet has been increasingly recognized as a major determinant of overall diet quality and nutrition outcomes. And as we all know, the prices of nutritious foods are much more higher than the foods that are calorie dense and micronutrient poor. And this situation has been compounded by the ongoing global crisis and the COVID pandemic situation. And now it has become a paramount to estimate the cost of healthy diets and its affordability. The term cost of recommended diet is an estimate of the basic minimum cost needed to meet a country's food-based dietary guideline. In Bangladesh, Dizen and Anna in 2019 have already estimated cost and its affordability, cost of recommended diet and its affordability. But their study used the decade-old food-based dietary guideline of 2012, and they also collected price of limited food items of 82, and the prices were collected back in 2014 and 15. With this current background, this study aims to estimate the cost of recommended diet and its affordability using the latest food-based dietary guideline of 2020 and the actual market prices of the food items collected through a market survey. Next slide. Okay, so here is the methodology. For estimating the cost of recommended diet, we first generated a food list containing 124 food items, and we prepared the food list from the food composition table of Bangladesh as well as from the recent nutrition surveys. And after that, we collected the prices of the food items from 48 locations all over Bangladesh, including both urban and rural areas. And after collecting the food prices, we estimated the cost of recommended diet through using these food items and the updated food-based dietary guideline on Bangladesh. Okay, so for estimating the cost of recommended diet, we followed several steps. In the first steps, we categorized all of the foods into the food categories according to the food-based dietary guidelines. And then we converted the food prices into the 100-gram edible price. And after that, we multiplied the 100-gram edible price with the serving sizes of each food group to obtain price per edible serving. In the third step, we multiplied the average price per edible serving
Abira, can you hear us?
I think some technical glitch from our side. Let me check with her.
Yeah. So coaches, what do you suggest? Should we wait or should we move on to the next presentation and Abira can come in towards the end of the session?
I think that sounds like a good idea to give her time to get back online.
Okay. Esther, are you able to share your screen?
Sure.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Esther Chu. I'm from the Department of Global Health at the University of Washington. And today I'll be presenting on developing a new approach to measure food environments in Nepal. So as we know, in the last several decades, and we've talked about this briefly, globally, we've seen a shift in food systems as a result of globalization and many other factors. And this has been accompanied by a notable increase in access and consumption of processed foods, high in sugar, salts, and trans or saturated fats, really resulting in a rise in obesity and diet-related disease in most low and middle income countries. In Nepal, for example, overweight among adults has risen substantially, with approximately a quarter of women experiencing overweight, and consumption of processed foods among children is relatively high, with about 50% of children consuming these foods in the previous day. We really need to understand what factors are related to this increased consumption of unhealthy foods in Nepal. With this shift in food systems, it's critical to look at how food environments have been shaped. When we talk about food environments, I'm referring to the factors which influence the decisions we make about what foods we acquire and consume. So food environments are made up of two dimensions, the external and personal domains. And under the external domain are the dimensions of availability and prices, vendor properties, including when markets are open, product properties such as quality and safety of food, marketing, and whether seasonal fluctuations affect availability and affordability of foods. And then under the personal domain, I refer to aspects of accessibility, affordability, such as purchasing power, and convenience, desirability, and social norms surrounding foods. Food environments are complex in Nepal as individuals access food from a wide variety of sources, including informal markets, food stalls, agriculture activities, and formal markets, which make food environments really difficult to measure as well. So there's a need for better measurement of food environments to be able to capture the influence of our environments on food choice, and to also better understand how food environments shape what we eat. So when we talk about measuring food environments, the existing surveys that have been developed have mostly been used in high-income countries. And I've pasted an example below, which is the Nutrition Environment Measures Survey, or NEMS, and it was developed mainly for North American contexts. And this is one of the more common environment measure surveys. Commonly, the existing food environment questionnaires have also have a focus on objective measures, such as physical distances to markets as a proxy for accessibility to foods, which sometimes involves actually collecting physical GPS coordinates. Often actual food prices are collected, or store inventories to assess physical availability of foods. On the other hand, perceived or subjective measures that consider an individual's experience or their perceptions of access or affordability of foods is arguably less studied. But I think that perceived food environments are critical because how people sort of perceive their access or perceive availability of foods can help shape to a large extent what foods people actually acquire and consume. These are the two objectives of this study. It was to develop a simple set of perceived food environment questions that could be easily inserted into an ongoing survey. And from that, we would use the data collected from that set of questions to develop a food environment index that encompasses the multiple dimensions of the food environment. So how can a food environment index be used, and what is it useful for? Indices have actually been quite widely used presently and in the past. One example is a wealth index, which is commonly included in DHS surveys, for example, or large-scale surveys, to create a summary measure reflecting where any given household or community is along the continuum between poor and wealthy. An index can be helpful to distill complex concepts that have multiple dimensions, such as the food environment, into a more simple measure to help with analysis and to communicate findings. So through adding in a set of simple questions, for example here, capturing as many aspects of the perceived food environment as possible, we can arrive at some sort of a score for each household and understand whether a household or an area's food environment is poor or rich for certain types of food. For example, if there's a perception in a household that snack or processed foods are convenient, accessible, and household members receive marketing messages about these foods, while at the same time they have perceived a low access or low availability or low affordability of vegetables, then we could classify this household as having an unhealthy food environment using the index. And using the food environment index will also allow us to measure the relationships between food environments and outcomes of interest, such as nutrition behaviors and nutritional status. So we designed the food environment survey questions based on the framework I previously described, and adapted questions from existing tools that were mostly used in high-income countries to the Nepali context to reflect each of the 10 dimensions listed here. And these are some of the examples of questions we included in the survey. We then consulted nutrition stakeholders and experts to gather feedback on early versions of the module. Then we further refined questions through a pilot test involving 146 women in one district in Nepal, and incorporated the set of questions in the Suhara 2 household survey led by Helen Keller International and New Era. In regards to our progress to date, questions were changed based off of feedback from the Nepal-based nutrition researchers and food environment experts. For example, in the original version of the survey, we had snack foods to refer to processed foods, but through expert consultation, we were made aware that the term snack foods is actually very tricky to define in Nepali. It's the same word used for an afternoon tea time or a light meal. So we decided to veer away from using that term and actually added in the word packaged foods and provided examples of what these processed foods are in the local context. We also pilot tested this questionnaire in a second step after making the first round of revisions from stakeholder feedback, and made additional changes such as this one where we adapted this question to reflect rural contexts where fruits and vegetables are often grown and not purchased. So this survey is adapted to use in both rural and urban contexts in Nepal. Finally, we have successfully incorporated questions into the Suhara 2 annual survey to collect food environment data on vegetables and processed packaged foods. For next steps, we will use data from the food environment module collected through the HKI monitoring survey to construct a final food environment score for each household using the index. We will then conduct robustness and validity testing of the index, and ultimately it will be used to analyze associations between the food environment and consumption patterns. I just want to acknowledge this great group of collaborators and my advisors on this work, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Esther. Thank you for the presentation. Abira, you're back, right?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, so I'll just pull up your presentations and let me know from where do you want to start.
Okay. Yes, we can start from the methodology section, I guess.
Okay, so over to you.
Welcome everyone again. Sorry for the inconveniences. As I talked about in the background section, that we are estimating the cost of recommended diet and its affordability in Bangladesh, according to the latest updated food-based dietary guidelines and the collected market prices. So in the methodology section, we have generated a food list of 124 food items that were obtained from the food consumption table of Bangladesh and the recent nutrition surveys. And after that, we collected price of these food items from 48 locations of Bangladesh, including both rural and urban areas. And with this collected price and the updated food-based dietary guideline, we estimated the cost of recommended diet. So we followed 4 steps in estimating the cost of recommended diet. In the first step, we categorized all the foods according to the food groups of the food-based dietary guideline, and we converted the prices into 100-gram edible price. And after that, we multiplied this 100-gram edible price with the serving sizes of each food group to estimate the price per edible serving. In the third step, we multiplied the average price per edible serving of 2 least cost foods from each food group with the average recommended sizes. We are taking 2 least cost food groups because the dietary guidelines promotes dietary diversity within the food groups. And finally, we summed the cost for eating recommended servings for each food group and calculated the final cost of recommended diet. Next slide, please. Okay, so in the next slide, we will see that how we estimated the affordability. Okay, for estimating the affordability, we first adjusted the household size with the adult male equivalent values. And this household size was taken from the household income and expenditure survey was of 2016. Then we multiplied the adjusted adult male equivalent value with the cost of recommended diet and a deflation factor. We have used a deflation factor because we used the price of 2016. So we use a deflation factor and it was 1.26 for national and urban areas and 1.27 for the rural areas. And then we divided the estimate by the household food expenditure and the results were expressed in ratios, and the ratios that were above 1 indicated that the household was unable to afford cost of recommended diet. Next slide. So here are the results. From the first graph, we can see that we have shown cost of recommended diet across residence and administrative units. By residence, we are referring to the national, urban, and rural areas. And by administrative units, we are referring here for the 8 administrative divisions of Bangladesh. So from the slide, we can see that the cost of recommended diet was $0.87 at the national level. And the cost was higher in the urban areas than the rural ones. And among the 8 divisions, the cost was the highest in the Sylhet division, whereas it was the lowest in the Rangpur division. And from the second graph, we can see the cost of recommended diet and household food expenditure. The graph shows that an average household in Bangladesh spends about 30% of their food expenditure on starchy staples, whereas to meet the recommended servings from the food-based dietary guidelines, the household only need to spend 21%, which implies that the household is overspending on starchy staples. And as a result, they are underspending on proteins, fruits, dairy, and vegetables. And at the same time, they are also overspending on fats and oils, and it is about 200% more. Next slide, please. So from this slide, we can see the percent of households that were unable to afford cost of recommended diet. So at the national level, 41.3% of the households were unable to afford recommended diets. And the burden of unaffordability was higher in the urban areas than were higher in the rural areas than the urban ones. And among the divisions, the percent of unaffordability was the highest in Khulna division, and it was 65.6%, and was the lowest in the Chattogram division, which is 25.5%. And from the overall map of Bangladesh, we can see that the unaffordability was higher in the southwestern parts of Bangladesh, followed by the northwest parts. Next slide. So after the results, here are the policy implications that what can we do to make healthy diets more affordable in Bangladesh. So we can give nutrition education programs, robust nutrition education programs through various channels that would help to bring changes from transitioning from rice-based food habits to diversified food habits. And along with the nutrition education program, we can also give behavior changes programs, and we can give social protection to the people, as well as we can take some food system policies, such as scaling up and intensifying home production through kitchen gardens and rooftop gardens. And finally, the government of Bangladesh would need to implement nutrition-sensitive agriculture policies that support stable food prices. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Abira. Now I request Anjali Pant to kindly share her screen and make a presentation.
Thanks, Isha. I hope my screen is visible.
It's fine. Yeah, please go ahead.
So thanks, Isha, and thanks, Ananya, for a wonderful introduction. I'm very happy to share on behalf of my team at IFPRI the preliminary findings of our study looking at the effect of COVID-19 on women and child dietary practices in India. As it's widely known now, COVID-19 had serious indirect repercussions on the food security worldwide. There was a shortage of resources, there were mobility restrictions, economy slowed down, and inequity sharpened, which I think together affected food supply chains and reduced household food demand. Literature suggests that poor diets can lead to malnutrition and mortality, and these effects might be carried over to the next generation as well. India faced 3 distinct peaks of COVID-19 between 2020 and 2022, which left the country vulnerable. Further, hunger levels in the country are serious, as indicated by the Global Hunger Index report of 2022. These factors and the availability of India's unique largest health survey that captures before and during COVID-19 situation motivated us to pursue this research study. The objective of our study was to examine the diet patterns among women and children in India between 2016 and 2021. Among women, we evaluated daily and at least weekly dietary patterns, and among children, we evaluated dietary patterns in last 24 hours of the survey. We used the National Family Health Survey data round 4 and 5. We first picked the NFHS 5 and classified the districts into 3 unique groups using the survey interview date threshold of 23rd March 2020. That is when India's national lockdown was announced. The three groups that I talked about are pre-C19, during C19, and pre and during C19. We picked the first 2 groups, and then we shortlisted 11 states where districts were surveyed across pre and during C19 phases. In this example towards the right, you can see that we chose Chhattisgarh state and not Bihar and Chandigarh, because in the former, we had a sample for both pre and during COVID-19. We then matched the sample, the NFHS 5 subsample with NFHS 4 and identified comparable districts. These comparable districts were then combined together, which finally led to the analytical sample of our study, comprising 10 unique states, 227 unique districts, and there were about 5 lakh women and about 2 lakh children. The primary outcomes of our analysis for women included diet composite score, which was a summation of 7 food groups, and minimum dietary diversity, which was intake of at least 4 out of 7 food groups. For children, we evaluated minimum dietary diversity and breastfeeding practices, including early initiation and exclusive breastfeeding. The secondary outcomes for women and children included individual food groups, such as dairy, pulses, vegetables, etc. The key predictor of our study was COVID-19 exposure, which was created using the survey interview date threshold of 23rd March 2020. In the analysis, we computed descriptive statistics and we analyzed the impact of COVID on diet using the difference in difference model, adjusted for survey weights, covariates, and robust standard errors. Women daily diet composite score in no exposure districts, depicted by the blue line, slightly improved between 2016 and 2021. The same metric in exposure districts, depicted by the orange line, also improved between the two time periods. However, the rate of improvement was lower in the exposure districts. That is why the DID estimate is negative, indicating a negative impact of COVID on daily diet score. Minimum dietary diversity improved in no exposure districts, but it declined in the exposure districts, indicating a negative impact of COVID. Also, one more point to note here is that the overall diet diversity was poor across the board. Consumption of individual food groups was also affected by the COVID. Cells highlighted with red indicate a negative impact. For most healthy food items, consumption increased in exposure districts, but the rate of increase was poor. The findings for women weekly dietary patterns were also similar. However, in the interest of time, I'll not discuss that now. Among children, diet composite score improved in no exposure districts, but remained fairly stagnant in the exposure districts. Findings were similar for minimum dietary diversity. Most individual food items were affected in exposure districts. One of the key things to note here is that exclusive breastfeeding improved substantially in the exposure districts. Concluding my presentation, I would like to make a few remarks that are relevant from policy perspective. First is that the dietary patterns among women and children were already poor before COVID. However, the pandemic did have an effect on food consumption. This finding has implications for malnutrition and mortality in the country, especially for the marginalized group. Second point is that we found that exclusive breastfeeding considerably improved in COVID-19 affected districts. This might be because there were mobility restrictions and maybe women stayed at home, which perhaps influenced the breastfeeding practices. Anyway, it's a positive finding which should be further promoted and encouraged. However, poor women diet accompanied by increased breastfeeding seems concerning and may need policy attention. Last point is that improving dietary patterns would need a sustainable, I would like to highlight a sustainable multi-sectoral response that aims to strengthen food supply chains and social protection strategies and reduce inequities in service provision. Wrapping up my session, I would like to share that our team is also looking at the impact of COVID-19 on diet across residence, wealth, and education levels to identify the potential pathways. Hopefully, we'll soon have something concrete to share with the larger nutrition community. But yeah, that's all for today. Thank you so much for attending my presentation.
Thank you so much, Anjali. Now we can move to the last presenter for this session, Ashi Gupta. Ashi, over to you.
Okay. Thank you, Isha, for sharing my slides. Okay. So good morning, panelists, committee members, and all the attendees. The title of our work is COVID-19 and Dietary Diversity. Using the high-frequency CMI-CPHS panel data, we examined the composition and determinants of dietary diversity in India prior to and during the COVID-19 pandemic. Next slide. A host of studies have attempted assessing the impact of pandemic on food composition and nutrient intake. These have suggested a shift from more nutritious diet to cheaper and less nutritious food, reduction in dietary diversity scores, and more so for the rural households with no formal education and low monthly income, and as well as houses in areas with high number of COVID-19 cases. It was also found out that there were significantly larger declines for nutritious food items. Therefore, all these studies point towards reduced ability of households to access quality diets due to affected production, supply restrictions, and reduced demand due to income, unemployment, and price shocks. Next slide. The objective of our study is to study the impact of pandemic-induced economic stressors and supply shocks on dietary diversity. We use an alternate measure of dietary diversity that captures not just the number of different items in the food consumption basket as used in the existing studies, but also the relative importance of different items or groups in the total food expenditure, which is akin to the Herfindahl's index. Therefore, according to our methodology, a higher IDD score is associated with a more concentrated diet, while a lower IDD score suggests a more diverse diet for the household. Next slide, please. So this figure shows the trends in index of dietary diversification that we have measured for rural and urban areas for the period January 2019, that is the pre-pandemic period, to August 2021, covering the two horrific waves of the pandemic in the country. So as you can see from the graph, the urban areas have a lower IDD score, indicating a greater dietary diversity as compared to rural areas throughout the period. We see a steep increase in the index at the onset of the pandemic in India and a sharp reversal once the lockdown restrictions were lifted. The reduced dietary diversity during the first nationwide lockdown may be explained by supply restrictions, forcing households to consume only what is readily available. Next slide, please. First, we employ techniques of IV estimation to examine the impact of state-level COVID-19 cases on the dietary diversity of households. Given that the COVID-19 cases may be endogenous, we instrument using two-stage least squares estimation. In the first stage, we estimate COVID-19 cases by using two instruments. The first is the length of transmission, which is calculated as the number of days between the first reported COVID-19 case in the particular state and the first reported COVID-19 case in the country, which was in Thrissur, Kerala. And the second instrument we use is the distance between the city that reported the first COVID case in the state and Thrissur in Kerala, which reported the first COVID case in the country. It is plausible to argue, given the nature of COVID-19 infection, that the longer the distance from Thrissur and the larger the time of transmission, the lower will be the intensity of the pandemic. We believe that the relationship between the instruments and the food diversity index of households is far from direct, and these are not just strong instruments, but also satisfy exclusion restrictions. Second, we employ techniques of DID estimation that compares the changes in dietary diversity before and during the COVID-19 pandemic in India for households that did face a severe income shock as compared to the households that did not face a severe income shock. Next slide, please. The results of the two-stage least squares regression suggest that the households shifted to a more concentrated diet as the pandemic intensified. The result is not surprising, given the fact that the supply chains were disrupted, supply of many food categories contracted, and the retail prices spiked during the first nationwide lockdown. Greater dietary diversity as households' per capita expenditures increase, but after a certain threshold, the diets become relatively more concentrated. Increased dietary diversity with household size. A plausible explanation behind this could be the varied tastes and preferences of members in the household. A very interesting finding is that the children-dominated households have a higher dietary diversity. So this could also be because of the varying energy needs of children, and the younger age groups are more attracted to new foods advertised in the media. Our results also suggest that households with female head have higher dietary diversity in urban areas particularly. Age of the household head is negatively related. This could be because elderly household head may be averse to more diverse, often more westernized diets. And we also see that the religion and religious beliefs play a major role in food choices of Indian households. Next slide, please. Moving on to the DID results. The affected households, that is the households that faced a severe income shock, had a relatively more concentrated diet than the less affected households. We see higher shifts to more concentrated diets in rural households as compared to urban. In some, an income shock of any magnitude proved to alter the dietary patterns of the households, both in rural and urban India, although the impact was more severe in rural areas and during the first wave of the pandemic compared to the second. Our model specification allowed us to control for household characteristics. We get similar results of the coefficients as in the two-stage least squares model, which confirms the robustness of the results. Next slide, please. So lower dietary diversity during situations of macroeconomic shock, such as the pandemic, may unravel a story of limited access and instability of food security among the lower segments of the society. Therefore, the regional balances should be checked for by taking relevant policy measures like better integration of markets, especially in rural areas. It is well documented that markets play an important role in determining diets. On the demand side, increased market integration enables the farmers to increase their incomes and purchase wide variety of goods and reduce their reliance on their own production. On the supply side, better market linkages improve availability of variety of nutritious foods. We also observe higher dietary diversity and lower fluctuation in the same during the pandemic in female-headed households. This is a very significant result that throws light on the importance of women empowerment. The focus must shift to provision of public goods, for example, the development of rural infrastructure, to facilitate participation of small holders in high value chains, regulation of food safety standards, nutritional labeling and education, and active involvement of private sector in adhering to regulatory standards and nutritional norms. In conclusion, a balanced and a nutritious diet is a must for a strong immune system to fight any form of infection and is also of utmost importance for recoveries post the horrific COVID-19 infection. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashi. Over to you, Meredith and Ananya.
Thanks a lot to all the speakers who have given such deep insights from different countries across South Asia. So towards the concluding segment, I would like to summarize some of the key takeaways from the presentations that were made today, starting with the first one, to say that while there are, of course, country-level variations across South Asia, which need to be accounted for while designing country-specific policies and programs, the larger picture from the presentations that we heard seems to suggest that population consumption of carbohydrates and fats is on the rise, while consumption of nutrient-dense foods like protein-rich food items, green leafy vegetables, legumes, and other micronutrient-rich foods continues to be comparatively lower. This also, one of the speakers also spoke about the policy implications that this has for diversifying our cropping patterns to move away from primarily rice-based food habits and to build the foundations for a nutrition-sensitive agricultural policies across the South Asian countries. The second takeaway, looking at the urban-rural variation, we see that in the country that was, and this was presented. So based on the findings from Bangladesh, we saw how diet quality does go down in rural areas compared to urban areas, and how percentage of expenditure on food also seems to be higher in rural areas, thus suggesting the greater economic vulnerability of rural households to food insecurity. A third takeaway was that recommending adequate dietary guidelines for the populations is only a starting point, wherein the affordability of diets ends up becoming one of the biggest determinants for consumption of nutrient-dense foods across the countries. And in the example that was given, almost about half of the population was shown to not be able to afford the recommended diet, wherein more than 1/3 of their expenditure was on starchy staples, with underspending on nutrient-dense food produce, like protein-rich animal foods, fruits, leafy vegetables, and dairy, which seemed to be an obvious pattern. This seems to be an obvious pattern across most of the South Asian countries. A fourth takeaway from the presentation was how we need to invest and learn more about measuring food environments in the context of the example given from Nepal. And this is especially given the rise in consumption of unhealthy, high calorie, high fat, high salt, high sugar packaged foods, coupled with exposure to market-driven advertising, and looking at how such food environments do influence food choices, and then and then how does that, and what does that really mean in terms of building healthier food environments and the policy implications that would stem from such a work. And then finally, we saw how COVID-19 and the data that was shared from India, how COVID-19 has served as a root reminder of our economic vulnerability to macro level food shocks, which has been shown to be more pronounced in the lower SES households and those who faced unemployment shocks, with a key finding on how higher dietary diversity and lower fluctuation was also observed during the pandemic in female-headed households. In conclusion, I'd like to thank all our speakers from my end for taking the time to share their insights from the extensive work that they've done on diets and determinants across South Asian countries. This does leave us optimistic about how such data and evidence can be promoted and advocated for evidence-informed policy making, data-informed nutrition interventions, better targeting of such interventions in priority populations, improved messaging for healthy eating, and then, of course, promoting greater convergence between agriculture and nutrition for nutrition-sensitive and sustainable food systems. So that's all from my end. Over to you, Meredith.
Thank you, Ananya. That you did a great job really summing up those key takeaways. Just to add, just to sort of bring it all together, there was a lot of what came out really speaks to policy implications in terms of advocating to have national level dietary indicators included in national level surveys for better evidence-based policy decisions and planning, but also shifting towards looking at more sustainable and resilient food systems, especially in light of the evidence coming from the COVID pandemic, and how can we advocate, really trying to think, how can we advocate at the national level for policies that do support resilient and sustainable food systems from a multi-sector perspective, a nutrition sensitive perspective, an affordability perspective, regulations on price fluctuations, regulations on perhaps what foods are available in the food environment. If junk foods are available, can we advocate for more regulation, better regulation of poor food, of poor nutrition value food? And I think another thing that came out was that interventions can need to really be localized as well, that each region and countries are not the same, and that when we're talking about resilient food systems and food environments, we need to be looking at the local level as well as the national level as part of a system. And that empowering women, I thought it was very interesting, the finding about women-headed households having better diet quality, and the findings that empowering women is also central to a better, more resilient food system. And so with that, I just want to thank all of the presenters for really excellent presentations, thought-provoking presentations, and encourage everyone to really take this and apply in how think about what can we do with this information now. We know we've got a lot of evidence now. How do we turn this into policy? And hoping that this will, in South Asia, help us work together across the countries to synergize what we're doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Ananya and Meredith. And thank you all the presenters. I see that you have already answered all the questions in the Q&A box, so making the life of our co-chairs easy. So thank you so much. We still have a minute. So Meredith and Ananya, any last comments from you, or we can just go ahead and close the session? And yeah, so do let me know.
One thing for me, and this is with the food environment, that just thinking about Esther's presentation, bringing in the perceived parts of it and the subjective is great. And I think creating a quantitative index is great. You know, it's good to put into the surveys. Could be complemented as well with qualitative understanding deeper on, you've got the context, what's driving the decision making within that context, where are the priorities when people are making decisions.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Meredith. So with this, we come to a close for our thematic session 3 on diets, and we have another session on children's diet, focusing on children's diet, which starts in another half an hour, so which is 12 p.m. India time. I request all of you to kindly come back, because that session will completely focus on what the children are eating in South Asia and children's diets, determinants and interventions in South Asia. And that session will be chaired by Dr. Sabrina Rashid from ICDDRB, Bangladesh, and Dr. Romania Iqbal from Aga Khan University, Pakistan. So looking forward to seeing you all again in another half an hour to join us for the next session, and closing this session with another co-host video from our very own Dr. Nazma Shaheen, who has been mentioned quite a few times during this session. So why not play her video as well? So just give me a second.
My name is Nazma Shaheen, professor at the Institute of Nutrition and Food Science, University of Dhaka, Bangladesh. As we know, the role of science in guiding interventions and programs and contributing to progress in achieving national and global targets is undeniable. In public health nutrition, biological research in the past focused largely on single nutrients and provided the basis for addressing nutritional deficiencies. This focus has now expanded to consider evidence, including knowledge about food, diet, behavior, context, and culture. As South Asia is facing double burden of malnutrition, the complex double burden of malnutrition will need to be addressed through a wider lens. Implementation research on dietary intervention will shed light on a healthy diet and its affordability. So further implementation research in nutrition required to translate the current evidence into effective actions that result in an impact on the scale. The conference on delivering for nutrition in South Asia is a very timely initiative to discuss and share the experience of the implementation of research in nutrition to support equitable access to nutritious and sustainable diets in South Asia.
You are on mute, Isha.
So sorry, that was Dr. Nazma Shaheen from University of Dhaka and one of our co-hosts for delivering for nutrition conference. So with this, I I would like all of you to I would like to remind all of you again to join back at 12 p.m. for the Children's Tide session. And thank you so much, Ananya and Meredith, for co-chairing the session and keeping us on time.
Sorry, Isha, could you clarify if people can just stay on the link, or should we leave and come back?
It'll be great if people can leave and come back.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.